Thank everyone for the opportunity to be here to speak today. I didn't take a chance to do an acceptance speech earlier, so I'll do a little bit of that now. I thank the organizers of the event for the award, and I'm really honored to receive that award. But I also often think of a saying that I use a lot. If you see a turtle on a fence post, you know he didn't get there by himself. I have had the fortune and good luck of having a strong team of individuals behind me, many of which have worked for me in several companies that have allowed me to achieve the things I've done. So I certainly couldn't have done anything without my team. So I certainly don't ever want to give a chance. I get to get the award and get the credit, but they do all the work. So thank you. So I'm going to talk. I changed the topic, I guess, a little bit. Status quo is not good enough. It's no longer an option. Talk a little bit about my background first. I am the CTO of Craneware. I've been with Craneware about 19 months now. My background has always been about solving problems. I'm a problem solver. We've already heard today that, and I love to use technology to solve business problems. And that's seeing a customer use my products and knowing that I've provided extreme value. The thing I always challenge my teams on is we should build products that customers want to hire to do a job that, demonstrate so much value that they're easy to sell and they want to do that. So that's always been my passion. I started off, did a lot of telecom work, some consulting work. For the last 12 years, I've been lucky enough to be in healthcare because, I kind of saw that everywhere else was catching up and leveraging technology really well to solve problems. But healthcare, as we all in this room know, has been abysmally behind on how we use technology and how we go about solving problems. My role as CTO of Craneware, I have everything from product inception, ideation, through product management to product delivery to supporting the product when it gets into production, DevOps, QA. I have our analytics and our big data teams and our teams for all that. So it's really, I'm fortunate to have that position. I love having that position. And that's what drew me here. At Craneware, so we're a 19-year-old company. We're publicly traded on the London Exchange, so Alistair's out there somewhere. He's from the UK. We were actually founded in Scotland by two Scottish guys. Most of my engineering team is in Scotland. I spent a lot of time in Scotland myself. But all of our customers, except for two small customers, are located here in the U.S. So what Craneware does is we are about providing better outcomes for all is kind of our tagline. And so providing better outcomes for our providers, we sell to the hospital market. We're probably in over a fourth of the hospitals in the U.S. And we help them manage their margin, help them increase their margin in everything from making sure that they charge and claim get the right charges on the claim, to making sure that the supplies that they're using are getting charged appropriately, to the pharmacy items that they're using is getting charged appropriately. So we help them. That's been our core bread and butter, is helping them maintain that margin so that they can stay in business. We heard a talk earlier that from Samit that most of the hospitals, and the biggest complaint they have is they're not making any money and that they can't continue on that way. So we want to help them identify and make sure that they have that margin. And we work with our customers, and then we see them take that margin and fold it back into providing better outcomes for patients, which is kind of our whole thing. And at Craneware, we have a lot of people who are clinicians that have been in the field, and they know the hospital world. They know every day what our customers deal with, and we try to take that to build problems to help them solve it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about status quo is no longer an option. We'll talk about the buzzword bingo for AI and machine learning and big data, and I'm not going to go into depth on that. We'd be here all day, and I'd bore everybody to death, probably myself. And then plus I mentioned I have a good team. If we needed to talk very deep, I'll have to get them. They just teach me the buzzwords so that I can sound like I know what I'm talking about. And then we'll talk about some questions and answers. So first of all, kind of the problem. Oh, I'm sorry, I got to do this, don't I? So the problem, U.S. healthcare spending versus quality outcomes. So we see that, in the U.S., we outspend everybody else in the world, and we have poorer outcomes than most of the developed nations. In fact, I think we're the only developing nation, or the only Western nation, whose average life expectancy is actually going down. We can attribute that to the opioids, to diabetes, to hypertension, to all the chronic problems that Samit was telling us about. But But, it's an interesting thing. It's not a problem that we can just keep spending more money on, because obviously that's not fixing the problem, or else we would have the best health care in the world, and we would, have the longest life expectancy of the world and the best infant mortality in the world, none of which we do. We're always pretty far down on those lists. So status quo, and maintaining that is no longer an option, and it's only going to get worse. Our population is aging. The chronic diseases are getting worse, so it's going to go. So status quo is no longer an option. We've got to find a better way. So the problem is complex, though, as we've discussed. There's, and especially in our field, if we look, people don't understand their margins. They can't couple financial and clinical outcomes. There's no way to tie it together. We're unable to control and manage costs. They have no control over their revenue models and sources. And so I could spend a lot of time on this, but it's, we all know the problem. But I think, I always like to put it in practical terms when I talk to, people that are outside the healthcare world. It's like, imagine if you went to get your oil changed, and I'll just use an easy example, and, the person changing your oil didn't know what they were going to charge you for changing the oil. They didn't know what they were going to get paid. You didn't know what it was going to cost you to get your oil changed, and then 90 days later, they're going to come back and expect some money from you for your oil change. And you'd go like, well, and guess what? If two different people come in, they get paid different and you pay different. It's not a, it's a broken system. And can we blow the system up? Yeah, it would be nice, but we can't necessarily do that. But, I would like to read one quote out of from there, and I'll have to see if I can read it from here. I can't read it over there. I made it small on purpose. But at its core, maximizing value for patients, that is, achieving the best outcomes at the lowest cost, we must move away from supply-driven healthcare and organize around what physicians do toward a patient-centered system organized around what patients what patients need. We heard that earlier today. We must shift the focus from the volume and profitability of services provided, physicians' visits, hospitalizations, procedures, writing prescriptions, the tests, to the patient outcomes achieved. That's Michael Porter, the strategy that will fix healthcare. So, we've got to change. So status quo is no longer an option. We've got to look for better ways and different ways of doing things. And so, we've got to do something. And I've been really impressed so far with the talks I've heard, everyone in this room. I think there's a passion here to change things. There's a room full of people who know how to change things. So that's kind of what I want to challenge us to do, and to look at some ways that can help us change things. So one of the things, we tend to look for, this is how we tend to look for solutions today, is, we go looking for a needle in a haystack. We have an idea of what the problem is, and we go focus, and we'll build a team around it, and we'll go try to focus and fix that problem. The scientific method has kind of taught us that. Ask a question, propose a hypothesis, go test it, come back and revolve, and that's kind of the way we do things today. And I think we often miss, what else is out there, what else we could do, and how we could solve things differently, because we have a specific idea in mind. If you go test drive a new car today, you may think, well, that's a unique car. The next thing you know, you start seeing cars like that everywhere. It's the same way. When we're looking for a specific way to solve a problem, or a specific problem we go after, then that's what we see. And we may miss tons of other things and other opportunities out there and ways to solve a problem. So I was lucky enough to get to visit a hospital in India. And so it was one that was built for medical tourism. And so patients from BMW and Michelin in Europe would come to India to have open heart surgery. So they handed me their tariff sheet. They said, okay, here's what it costs for open heart surgery, and here's what it includes. It's like 2 days, 1 day before 1 day in the hospital before, 2 days in the ICU, the surgeon, the anesthesiology, a day or two in the hospital afterwards, all your medicine, here's your price. Oh, and just pick which room kind you want, and based off of the room type you pick, that changes the price. And I'm like, can you imagine in the U.S. healthcare, could we ever do that? I mean, they managed to do it, so they must understand what it costs. They must understand what they need to make revenue, because it's a for-profit hospital. It's Apollo Hospitals. They make money. So they must have figured out something that somehow we in the U.S. healthcare have missed. So I'd like to challenge us to, how do we think about problems differently, and how do we look at them to come up with those ideas. So, so sometimes we should let the data tell the story. If we're looking for a particular needle, we may miss a lot of other needles in the haystack. We may miss needles that don't look exactly like what we're solving. And so this is kind of my entree into big data was an HBR article, and I tried to find it so I could cite it exactly. But from like 6 or 7 years ago, and they brought in a set of people to look at their data. It was a call center, so it's not even hospital. And it was one of those where like you sign up for something, and if you don't call back in 30 days, you keep getting billed for it. So they were trying to work on their call center. And they said, well, how can we make our call center better? So they brought in some big data people early on, or some we wouldn't even call them big data or data scientists then, just some people to look at the data, thinking about a typical call center application of how they could optimize the call center. Well, what the people did is said, wait, let's just look at the data and let the data tell the story. So what they ended up with was they found out that depending on who the person was on the phone and the agent that they talked to, that they had different outcomes. So if you were somebody who's, you guys have figured out I'm from the South, they would hook me up with a call center agent from the South because they had a better close rate. So they looked at the close rates in the data, and it said, and so they would say, well, they might keep me on hold a little longer rather than a typical call center. How quick do I get them out of the queue? They might keep me in there a little longer because it was a better outcome for them if they attached me to somebody who could form a relationship with me and who, so it just totally changed my way of thinking on when we look at problems. Let's let the data tell the story. Let's bring in and let's see what's out there rather than having that preconceived idea of what we're looking for. Let's see what we can find by looking at the data. So kind of want to talk about is there some new technologies and some ways I think that can help us do that. And so this is where we'll start a little bit of the buzzword bingo. But before we get there, why AI, big data? Why does this all work in healthcare? Why is healthcare a good spot for it? One, we have a wealth of data. We have so much data to look at. If you read studies, probably 30% of the data in the world is healthcare data. But if you look at the like data scientists and the people who are looking at this data, it only accounts for 3% of the people that are looking at it. So there's a big, huge amount of data, a big, huge thing we can do with it. It's complex data. It's not, it's not structured data. It's lab data. It's EMR data. It's clinical notes. It's, it's claims data. How can we look at that and do it? And the healthcare landscape is changing, as we heard earlier. Technology's changing. Things are changing. Reimbursement models are changing. And, we can improve value-based economics to enable clinicians to focus better on patient outcomes. There's a reason that we can solve this. And I think if you read probably 25% of the cost of healthcare is in admin cost that we could greatly reduce and simplify and allow that to be used much better. So a little bit about, AI defined high level. And if, show a little bit of a geek of what I am. When I was back in college, back in the 80s, there was a 3-set volume of books called AI. And they're big, huge books. And I bought them, and I did work in expert systems, and I thought, man, this is the next big thing. That was 30 years ago, and it's just now starting to be applied. So I'm glad to finally see it starting to be applied and starting to go. But so, artificial intelligence, is a part of computer science. It allows an intelligent task to be carried out by a machine. We can take that further into machine learning, an application or a subset of AI in which machines learn from the data, and we can move into predictive modeling where we're leveraging statistics to produce outcomes. So I try to tell my marketing folks, if I could just come up with a phrase and do a press release that says, we're leveraging artificial intelligence, machine learning, predictive modeling, and tie in robotics somehow, then our stock price would probably triple. And there are some companies that have gotten in trouble, I think, for kind of in Europe for kind of tagging on some of those things. So we wouldn't do that. But it's part of the buzzword bingo, and I won't spend a lot of time describing any of this. A little bit about analytics. We have the descriptive analytics, and if you think about that, that's, back to what we're most usually associate with analytics. It's the key performance indicators. It allows me to compare my department to another department, or my department in one hospital facility to the hospital facility to another, the same department in a different facility. So, presenting descriptive statistics, averages, medians, am I doing better or worse than the competition? Then we can move into predictive, which we're talking about providing insight into what will happen in the future utilizing various machine learning and statistical modeling techniques. So I think that's where, we can look at claims data. We can say, okay, based off of all the data, and this is one of the things we've done before, is looking at the set of claims across the patient, you can predict, one, whether they will be readmitted or what is, maybe disease progression. I'm interested in Alistair's information on how they're predicting chronic care and the disease progression, because, one way we do that is looking at predictive analytics and saying, based off of all the things we can see, based off of their blood pressure, based off of changes, based off of glucose change, you can predict what's likely to happen next. And then prescriptive is providing insight into what action should be taken in the future based on the results of those activities. So, how should we treat a patient differently? Should their medicine be changed? Should they, should we up their monitoring? Should they go from a once a day call to a 3 times a day call? Or, should we recommend that they come in and see us in the clinic? Or should we go to more just pure monitoring of them? So, and then there's types of machine learning. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you basically deal with either continuous data, or you can deal with categorized data, and that depends on kind of how you treat it. But for machine learning, we can do supervised learning, where we develop predictive models based on both input and output data, or unsupervised learning based off a group and interpret data based only on the input data, which we can then get into clustering, regression, classification, and probably just some good examples. Classification example is predict whether a patient will be admitted to the hospital, based off of some history of what you see. Regression example is predict a patient's length of stay, and say, well, we do those things now, but we can get much deeper information into it, based off of if we both come in with the same diagnosis and we both have the same things, we can look at levels deeper data and say, well, based off of their blood pressure and based off of the medicines they're on and based off of, some demographic data even, or some, based off of the, area they live in, based off of the socioeconomics, then, they're going to be treated differently, or based off of where we think they're going to go home to when they're dismissed from the hospital, we may say, it's better if we keep them a little longer than if we send them home. So we can actually use that intelligence for good. Clustering example is group admitted patients based off their diagnosis history. So there again, we can say, based off of that history, we may treat you a little different when you show up. And, certainly, if we were to talk about genomics, we don't talk about genomics much within my organization just because we feel there's lots of other people focusing on that. But then you could tie genomics type stuff into this as well. And then you got deep learning, and neural networks. We've probably heard enough about this at the time. And an application of subset of machine learning originally inspired by the function of the brain. So how do we tie and start tying in multiple layers and multiple levels to form hierarchical data sets? Deep learning is application or subset of machine learning that leverages neural networks with many different layers. So, we could talk, at depth about some of those types of techniques, but I don't think that's purposeful here. My main goal is to say there are things out there to solve problems differently than how we've solved them in the past. And then to the ever ubiquitous big data, and that's the one that we talk about and that we have lots of. It's difficult to analyze using traditional methods. There's been 3 things: volume, variety, and velocity of the data. Things are shifting more towards how do I look at data more real time. Typical big data, we've looked at it in the past and been very, backwards looking, but now how can we use streaming data as things come across to take more action more quickly? And then, it's been expanded to talk about veracity. which is, looking at how much do we really understand the accuracy of the data. A lot of times, we talk about building a longitudinal record, what is the accuracy of that data? What is, how precise is that data? And then we have to look at the value of the data. We can collect tons and tons of data, but is there really any value? And what is the value of the output of that? This is probably the most, big data is probably the most advanced of where we're at now, applying machine learning, but there's still many, many areas that we can look at and apply this to as well. So just a few examples of places where this could apply. Population health management. I enjoyed Catherine's talk this morning. I think, Catherine, you brought a different view of population health than what I have had in the past, actually bringing it down to a group and a population of people. I've tended to think of population health, from the statistical side of it and gathering data and, how do I manage this population? I've not, you actually tied it to people for me, and that always helps me is when we can tie it to people. So thank you for that. Precision medicine, scheduling and operational efficiency, genomics, natural language, revenue analytics. There's many, many more. One of the things that we've been applying it at recently, I talked about the earlier problem, and my vision is to help hospitals understand the cost of providing care and then the charges they collect for providing that care so that they can actually derive, this is my vision I challenge my team on. We're nowhere near there yet, but we're working in these areas. So that you could do on a patient encounter, define the profitability of a patient encounter. And if we think about it, there's lots of costs that go into that, from being able to understand the nursing care, the bed care, the supplies, the non-billable supplies, the reimbursable supply, But how do I get it all the way down to, so if someone comes in for a knee replacement, did I actually make money on that knee replacement, or did I lose money? And so that I can actually, on a per incident basis, per encounter basis, actually know the profits, and then apply even more data to that to say, why was patient A profitable and patient B wasn't? How do I find that out? And, a lot of the things we're looking at is also looking at two physicians who both do knee replacements and looking at the outcome and saying, well, could they have both used a cheaper implant or cheaper supplies in the OR and had the same output, and could we, so how can we increase our margin that way? So, and helping get it to the point, where the physician can understand and see too and say, I can understand why that way works just as good as the way I've been doing it and provides maybe even a better outcome, or do I need to spend more money to get a better outcome? So helping them understand those pieces. So kind of back again to let the data tell the story. My challenge is look at problems differently. Don't get caught up looking for the one needle in the haystack when there are probably many other ones that we haven't thought about looking for. And then just my last one is I always like to end with this picture, because this picture kind of reminds me that it's all about the patient. Everything we do, and if we ever forget that what we do is touching real lives and touching the lives of people, then we're in it for the wrong reason. And that's the reason I came to healthcare, is because I want to help change patients' lives. I want to make them better. I've been a patient. Emory University Hospital's in my neighborhood, and I think at one point in time I felt like I needed to be a gold member because I'd had so many nights I wanted to be a frequent stayer and get special treatment or something, like I do on Delta. But don't look for common solutions to common problems. Instead, look for uncommon solutions to the complex problems facing us in healthcare, and remember that it's all about the patient.
Thank you. Are there questions for Marty?